So what's happening in the Wisconsin economy? And what does the near-term future of the economy look like? I can move it around. Okay. It's really, we got a lot of mixed signals going on in terms of whether or not we're going to be going into a recession or not. And I really don't have the time to kind of get into the details of why we've got so many mixed signals. So I just want to kind of touch the highlights. Okay. If you read the media, and nothing against the media, Pam, but the media headlines almost are consistently saying we're going to go into an economic recession. Except for there's one. I found one out of Jacksonville, Florida. They talked to one economist that said, actually, you know, the economy, we're probably not going to go into a recession. Okay, so what's going on here? What's happening with Wisconsin? If we look at gross domestic product, which is kind of the granddaddy measure of the economy, this is a growth index, so we're looking at percent change from one year to the next. And we're looking at the US, we're looking at Wisconsin, and we're looking at the Great Lakes states, of which Wisconsin is part of. And you can see relatively stable growth until COVID hits. Okay, and then we had the COVID recession. We kind of went into a lockdown, and then we kind of came out of it again. It's the closest thing that we have kind of experienced in terms of like turning off the economy and then trying to turn it back on. Now we're coming out, and you look at the most current data, which is the third quarter of 2022, which is the most current that we have for the state of Wisconsin, is that we're looking fine. There's no indication of an economic slowdown. But this is in nominal dollars. We're not taking out the effects of inflation. If, however, we recalculate this in real terms and we take out the effect of inflation, we get a very different picture. Gross domestic product, we bounce back out of the COVID recession, and we kind of had modest growth. But what's been happening over the last year or so? Essentially, inflation is eating away at all of the growth that we've been experiencing. So in nominal terms, we look fine, but in real terms, we're flat. We're not growing at all. Indeed, we're not really back to where we were before COVID hit. Okay? Now, if you look at personal income, which is comprehensive measure of income, it's wages and salaries, proprietor income, dividends, interest, and rent, even transfer payments like Social Security payments. Okay? You can see, again, it's a growth index, but this is really odd. What happened at the height of the COVID shutdown? This is federal stimulus money. Okay? This is essentially the feds essentially handing out all those checks to essentially minimize the impact of the economy shutting down. Those payments essentially prevented us from going into a really deep recession. So that's why we see those kind of two spikes right there. Okay? And again, you can see that, you know, Wisconsin is doing quite well, thank you very much, until we take in the effects of inflation. Indeed, inflation is eating away at our personal income. We're talking about labor getting a 3% pay raise, a 4% pay raise, but inflation is at 6 and 7%. So although I got a 3% pay raise, I'm actually 3 or 4% backwards because inflation is eating away at the growth that we're having. Okay? Now, what about employment? If we look at the employment index, this is a growth index for employment. You can see that Wisconsin kind of hit a little bit of a plateau in terms of growth of employment prior to COVID. You can see the economy shutting down, but notice that the index drops about 15%. So we talk about the economy shutting down, we really only lost about 15% of employment. That means that there are 85% of people who are still working through COVID. You can see the recovery a little bit slowly. Now notice that Wisconsin is not coming back nearly as fast. We're not back to where we were before. Is this because businesses are not hiring, or is this because we don't have the people to fill the jobs? Okay? If we look at the unemployment rate, you can see the spike. That's, you know, historians are going to go back and look at this and go, wow, that's really an outlier. Okay, because we've never gone through an experience like this before. So there's no kind of historical precedence that we can kind of look to kind of learn from. Okay, so this is very new. You can see the recovery. Notice the last couple of years that the last couple of months, the unemployment rate ticks up just a little tiny bit. We still have very, very low unemployment rates. Okay, so the question is, we're not seeing a lot of job growth in Wisconsin, but we see very low unemployment rates. What this is indicating is we simply don't have the people to fill the jobs that are out there, okay? Now, this is looking at kind of three measures. This is a new set of data that the Federal Reserve, or not the Federal Reserve, the Department of Labor Statistics is able to put out, and they've gone backwards on this. What this is looking at job openings, the red line, the hiring, which is the black line, and the lays off and the discharges. You can see COVID with the number of layoffs, that spike right there. But look at the number of openings over the past year or so. It's really gone up tremendously. Okay, more so than you would expect simply coming out of the recession, out of the COVID recession. Businesses are trying to expand. How many of you have heard that some of the big tech companies are laying off workers? Okay, they're laying off 10,000 workers. One of the reasons is because when we came back out of COVID, they were overly aggressive in hiring too many people. Okay, now if we were going into a recession, right, we would expect the number of job openings to be declining. It's not. It's still really high. We would think the number of hires, the black line, to be declining. It's not. It's flat. Layoffs and discharges, we would expect that to be inching up. It's not. Okay? So by this measure, for the state of Wisconsin, there's no indication that we're going into a recession. Okay, remember that kind of picture that I had. Okay, this is one of those pieces of evidence that is saying that, no, Wisconsin is doing fine, thank you very much. Okay, now this is the Wall Street Journal they used to do it monthly, now they do it quarterly, is they survey about 70 different economic forecasters from banks, insurance companies, universities, individual forecasters. And one of the things that the research suggests is that if you have a room full of economists, and they're all economic forecasters, and that's what they do, right? If you pick one at random and ask them what their economic forecast is, they're probably going to be wrong. But if you take an average across all of them, the research suggests that that average is pretty bang on. So what I've done here is I've computed an average, and then computed a standard deviation. I added the standard deviation, I subtracted to kind of get an idea of the range. And what are we seeing here? This is the predicted and this came out Monday a week ago. So this is kind of hot off the presses, okay? So what do we see? Essentially, at the end of the second quarter, going into summer, the general consensus is that we're going to go into an extremely mild recession. Okay? But yet, you still see that there's a number that are actually above that recession line. Okay? This is part of that mixed picture. So what the evidence is suggesting, what the economists are suggesting is that, yeah, guess what? We're probably going to go into a recession, but it's going to be an extremely mild recession. But the evidence for Wisconsin is that the labor market is doing quite well, which is kind of counterintuitive. This is where economists are really kind of confused. Well, economists are always confused. But this is where that picture of kind of a chaotic painting comes into play. Because some indicators are saying, hey, we're headed towards a recession. But there are other indicators that are going, no, we're doing quite well, thank you very much. Okay? Now, the other thing that they do is they ask the economists, what is the probability of going into a recession in the next 12 months? Okay? The average here, there's a couple that say, there's one person that says we have a 100% chance of going into a recession. There's one person up there that says we have a 1% chance of going. Take those two extremes, throw them out, right? Well, what it is here is that the average is about 60%, 65% probability that we're going to be going into a recession, okay? And almost 80% suggest that there's more than a 50-50 chance. So looking forward, yeah, we probably are going to go into an extremely mild recession, and then we'll come right back out of it again. So now, is that a soft landing, or is that an actual recession? That's open to debate, okay? So I'll stop there, and I think we go into panel mode.